back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I'm here today to do an exciting video. This is going to be the second Booktube SFF Babbles that I have filmed this year. This one I'm really excited about because this is one of my favourite topics to watch other people's videos for, and there will be other people making these videos too, so if you haven't watched other people's videos, definitely search Booktube SFF Babbles, underrated SFF, and some other videos will no doubt come up either today or in the next few days as people make them, and I'm sure you'll get so many recommendations from all the people who are making the videos, and I'm really excited to share my recommendations with you. So I'm going to be honest, I think they're all fantasy. I mean, one is kind of sci-fi, but all the others are fantasy. Mainly because I mostly read fantasy. I don't feel as well versed in science fiction, although I am reading more of it. I don't feel like I've read a lot of underrated sci-fi. I'm still trying to go through a lot of the ones that people talk about. So I'm mostly going to be recommending you fantasy. I have two standalones, one where I've read all of the books that are currently out, and then the rest of them are just the first book in a series that I've read, and I need to continue on with the series, but either the second book isn't out yet, or it is and I just haven't got around to reading it yet, but I really should. So let's start off with the two standalones, because that seems like a good place to start. So the first one I want to mention to you is kind of a sci-fi book. It's this one, Theatre of the Gods by SUDDAIN, and this book is mad. That is probably the best way to describe this. It is absolutely mad. If you've read anything like Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams in the past, it's kind of in a similar vein. It's very bizarre, it's very satirical, it's very funny, it's very witty, and it follows a mad scientist kind of character who gets himself into all sorts of trouble very early on in the book, and he ends up on this space mission to try and go to a parallel dimension. He also meets a blind girl and a deaf boy. Whilst he's on board this spaceship, he's being chased by the Pope. There's a lot of really crazy things going on in here, and honestly it's quite a hard book to explain because it's quite chunky, a lot happens, and most of it's very bizarre and mad. If you like Terry Pratchett and you like Douglas Adams, I think you'll enjoy this. I don't know if it's everyone's cup of tea, but I do think it's a book that is just super fun and enjoyable and made me laugh and smile and roll my eyes multiple times, and I definitely enjoyed the fact that it's a very self-aware book. It talks to the reader directly at some points in the narrative, and I really like that, so I would definitely recommend this. I really enjoyed it when I read it, and I haven't seen probably anyone else really talking about it, so I would certainly recommend it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have read it, or if you are planning to pick it up, let me know that too. The next one I have to recommend is also a standalone, and this one is very much in the theme of fairy tales, so if you are interested in fairy tale retellings, this might be a book for you. However, it's not a classic fairy tale retelling, it actually is inspired by Russian fairy tales. It's quite cold, it's kind of a forestry setting, and it's quite dark, and there are some sort of quite melancholy, lonely, rural moments, and I really enjoyed that about this story. It's quite a sad little story. It follows the tale of a young girl whose mother dies not long after she gives birth to her, and so she's mostly raised by her older siblings and her father, and she can see these household spirits which no one else can see. These spirits have been around for millennia, they help out, and yet no one else can really see them because a lot of people don't believe in magic anymore, and she's the only one who sees them, and unfortunately the reign of Christianity is coming their way, and it means that people are converting to Christianity and other faiths, and they're not believing in the household spirits anymore, and these household spirits are dying off slowly, and it means that the place where she lives is gradually being invaded by other horrors. And it's a really beautiful book. It's lovely in how it's written, it's very cold, it's very dark, and really was surprised by how much I like this, because I'm not often someone who picks up fairy tale retellings, and when I do I tend to often find them quite predictable because I've already sort of read the originals, but the fact that this was inspired by a Russian sort of story and was a bit more unique, I suppose, made this really interesting for me, and I definitely would recommend picking this one up and trying it if you're into fairy tale stuff whatsoever. I've read 4 books in the series. The 5th one comes out this year, so I'm super excited, and that is the Lady Trent, or Memoirs of Lady Trent series. It's written by Marie Brennan, and there are 4 books in the series currently out. So the first one is A Natural History of Dragons, then we have The Tropic of Serpents, and then we have The Voyage of the Basilisk, and finally we have In the Labyrinth of Drakes. So I've read all of them and I really enjoy them all. This follows a woman called Lady Trent. She is a dragon naturalist, but we follow her from when she is a sort of young woman looking to decide on a career and how she gets into dragon naturalism. She writes in her memoirs about the realities of how difficult it was to get into the dragon naturalism field, being a woman, and this is set in a sort of Victorian era time. It's very difficult for her to be accepted as a professional, as a scientist, being a woman, and we see her not only being accepted and being praised and being gradually given the recognition she deserved from the beginning, but we also see her grow as a character. We see the adventures she goes on, the dragons she encounters, the scientific discoveries that she makes about these creatures. We see the other characters in the plotline who are very open and accepting to her, and some who are not, and the people that she gets on well with and doesn't. And I just really love this series. I would describe it as a sort of fantasy of manners series, and it's an excellent, light-hearted, really beautiful, really fun, and definitely quite a poignant series as well. Really relevant to today and such an approachable read, so I would 100% recommend these books. The first one in the series is A Natural History of Dragons, so pick this one up first. But the whole series is great and I'm so excited, although also a little bit sad that it will be ending this year and the 5th and final book will be out. So this series is definitely one I would always recommend. And now it really wouldn't be me without some epic and sword and sorcery fantasy recommendations. So the first one I have is a sword and sorcery. This is Hope and Red by John SKOVRON. It's the first one in the Empire of Storms series, and it follows 2 characters who are called Hope and Red. And these 2 characters meet each other in this story. They kind of grow up in very different, very separate lives. One is male and one is female, and they meet each other through various means in the plot, and this means that they go on all sorts of adventures together. They kind of discover a lot more about themselves, but really this is a coming-of-age story done very quickly. If you've read a lot of sort of classic or epic fantasy, you know the trope of the young chosen one has to go through a lot of battle scenes and montages to get to where they need to be in book 3. This is not really that. This is kind of a sped-up, condensed version, so we do see a sort of battle montage kind of thing, but it's very short. It gets to the action of the story a lot quicker than most, and I really enjoyed seeing these 2 characters' stories coming together, intersecting, but also moving at quite a fast clip and actually getting somewhere with the narrative very fast. So a lot is covered in this book. It is quite chunky, but it reads really fast, and I'm super excited to carry on with the story in the second one. Another one that I've read recently and really enjoyed but haven't heard too many people talk about is The Curse of CHALION, which is the first book in the 5 Gods series by LOIS BUJOLD. I honestly should have read this way before I did. I've heard so many great things about LOIS BUJOLD, but most of them were about her science fiction, and I didn't even realise she wrote fantasy until I sort of stumbled across this one. So I decided I was going to start with the fantasy just because I really like fantasy. So I'm so happy I did. I really love this story. It's a beautiful, heart-wrenching, tragic story following a man called KATHERINE, who's kind of in his 30s when we pick up the story, which in itself is an interesting factor because often you follow a young boy through his boyhood and training and, like I just said, the sort of chosen one trope, whereas in this story it's very much an aged warrior who's been through quite a lot. He's quite damaged, he's got a lot to deal with in his past, and that makes him a much more interesting character, I think, because he is sort of damaged goods and he has his own problems and his own issues to overcome in the story alongside what is going on in the plot, which is definitely magical, but I would say this is fairly low on the magic. There is this magic in the world and it's largely done through blood sacrifice, so it's kind of like a necromancy type of magic, but it's not a huge focus of the story, and even though it is used in the story, it doesn't really overtake it. It's largely about KATHERINE and his life and kind of understanding him, and then the people that he is protecting, because we follow him as he goes back to his home from being a young child and being a page in a castle. He goes back there and he helps to look after the young princess who is living there, and takes her on a journey to meet her betrothed, and all sorts of other things go wrong, of course. But it really is quite different to a lot of fantasy I've read, in that it follows a different sort of character, and that completely gives it a whole different feeling. And I really think that LOIS McMaster Bujold can write really, really well as well, which obviously adds to the story too. I'm actually currently reading the second one in the series and really, really enjoying that as well, so I can only see that getting a great rating too. The next one I have is The Shadow of What Was Lost, which is by James Islington. This is a book that I would recommend to fans of Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson and sort of the mainstream big epic fantasy writers. I would say it's like those two writers because it has a kind of similar idea of this very grand, expansive world and this big epic quest. It doesn't feel Tolkien-esque, it feels a lot more Wheel of Time-esque. But instead of being very long and very rambly, it's a lot more readable, it's a lot more fast-paced, it has more interesting magic systems, hence why I say Brandon Sanderson as well, because the magic, different plot elements that really surprised me were very much more in his style than Jordan's style. I honestly was so shocked when I read this because it was originally self-published and it was doing very well as a self-published book, and then it got picked up by Orbit. As you can see, this is the Orbit edition. I actually audiobooked this originally because Audible kept on recommending it to me and it was great. I loved the audiobook so much, and I would certainly recommend trying it that way, but I mean this edition is beautiful too. We follow 3 different characters who are all part of a school. They're in training to try and become, I think, mages or something like that. One of them is lagging behind. His magical ability hasn't really been unlocked yet, and so it comes to the day where he has to take the test and he's not quite ready, and so he and his friends decide that they need to do something, and he has to run away. It seems as though people might be hunting him. I really liked the way that the narratives kind of complemented each other, so there was always something going on. It never felt stale or boring, it always felt action-packed and really exciting, and I am so intrigued about what's going to happen in the next book because there were some amazing plot twists in this story that I don't think I could ever have seen coming, if I'm honest. Like, they were just amazing plot twists, so I'd really recommend this. I definitely think it's a great story and I hope that you guys pick it up and enjoy it, but do let me know if you are planning to. And the final one I have to recommend to you is one that I actually very recently finished. This is Dawn of Wonder, the first one in The Wakening by Jonathan Renshaw, and this is a self-published book. It's not published by a traditional publisher yet, although maybe it'll be picked up by one, I don't know. I honestly fell in love with this story. It's again kind of in a similar vein to the epic fantasy writers of like George R.R. Martin and other big name fantasy writers. However, it does only have one point of view, and that is Aiden. We're following Aiden in his hometown of the Misty Vales. It's quite a rural, abandoned area. There's just a little village there really, and a manor house, and his best friend is the young girl who lives in the manor house, and then they have a group of sort of other youths who they play with. They're adventurous, they're loyal, they're fun, they love daring each other to jump off of cliffs into waterfalls and such. They kind of just mess around in the countryside and they're quite sheltered, to be honest, but Aiden is a very intelligent young child, as is his best friend, and the two of them like to play games together where they try and guess things about other people without being told, just by looking at clues, kind of in the same idea as like Sherlock, if you've seen the TV show. So Aiden is a very interesting child, and then unfortunately something terrible kind of happens quite early on in the book that means that Aiden then has to flee with his family away from the Misty Vales, and they actually go south. They pass this giant fortress, which you can see on the front cover, which is abandoned, it's horrible, it's got like creatures of goodness knows what in there, and it's abandoned and nasty, and no one ever wants to go past it, so there's not much trade between the north and the south in this world, but they do make it to the south, and once they get there, because of the events that happen in the very beginning of this book, Aiden decides he wants to train up and go through the kind of classic montage of training. But I do think it's done very well in this story, and I think there's a lot of positive elements in it. I think there was only one slight detraction of like a love interest story that died out quite quickly, luckily. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I felt like the pacing was good. I really enjoyed the different elements that he wove into the story. You see a lot of different things being thrown at our main character, and he fields them very, very well. So I really loved it, and I definitely would, again, really recommend the audiobook of this one, because I did audiobook this and then bought the physical edition afterwards. I loved the audiobook. It's narrated by the same narrator who does Michael J. Sullivan's books, which is fantastic. He's great, and I can't recommend this more highly to you guys. So those are my underrated science fiction and fantasy recommendations. Pretty heavy on the fantasy, as I say. If any of these books sound good to you, do let me know which ones you'll be picking up if you've already read them. Tell me your thoughts. Would you recommend them? If you have any other recommendations for me that are underrated, that you don't hear spoken about on Booktube, tell me them in the comments below. Maybe I'll check them out and read them. So please do let me know your recommendations as well. And if you have done a video on this topic, link it to me. You still have time. It doesn't have to be today. If you just want to go and make a video on this topic, we would still love to see it even after today. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for joining in with the Babbles, and I will see you next time with another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.